The first time I thought about running away was during the morning prayer. My dad stood there with his eyes closed, hands raised, his steady voice echoing words that no longer reached me. My mom nodded with her chin, as she always did, and my brothers seemed numb from the repetition. But me, I was there with my heart pounding and my mind miles away, imagining what lay beyond the dirt road that sliced through our small town like a forgotten scratch on a map. In that moment, I realized my faith wasn't mine. It never had been. It was a cloak they draped over me as a little girl, buttoned up so tight it choked who I was. And I'd worn that cloak so long I forgot what my own voice sounded like when it wasn't shaped by scripture. My name is Abigail Grace Turner, and I'm the pastor's daughter. The girl who never showed up late to church, who led the choir with a sweet voice and downcast eyes, who could quote Psalms and Proverbs like poetry. The girl everyone praised at Sunday potlucks as a model of purity and obedience. But no one ever asked if I wanted to be that girl, not even me, until he showed up. The stranger came the way life-changing things do, without warning. I first saw him across the gas station lot, leaning against an old pickup truck, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses, his shoulders carrying something invisible that no one around here seemed to notice, but I did. There was something about him that hit me like a whisper. It wasn't beauty, though he was handsome in an imperfect, honest way. It was how he didn't try to fit in. Like he'd long lost interest in being accepted anywhere. It took me 3 days to learn his name, Caleb. They said he was just passing through, stopped to work a temporary gig at Mr. Whitley's farm. And that scrap of info was enough to send my mind wandering out of control. I thought about him during prayers, hymns, even while reading the Bible. And with every thought, a piece of the molded Abigail started crumbling inside me. I didn't talk to him, not at first, but I felt like he saw me. And when our eyes finally met, wordless, with no intentions laid bare, I knew something had already started, even if no one else noticed. That night, as my dad preached about obedience and submission, I looked at him and felt anger for the first time, not just at him, but at everything. At the faith they used like a leash, at the fear they taught me to call holiness, at the ready-made destiny they handed me before I even knew who I was. That's when I thought about running away a second time. And this time, not just with my body, but with everything I was. The next week, I started finding excuses to pass by where he was, sometimes with a notebook in hand, pretending I needed quiet to write, other times with a small grocery bag, telling myself I needed to walk more. I never spoke to Caleb in those early encounters, and he didn't start conversations either. But there was a whole dialogue happening in the space between us. He looked at me like someone recognizing a scar they share, not invasively, but with a clarity that made me uncomfortable and alive at the same time. When I crossed paths with the Yost, churchmen, I knew what their eyes searched for in me: submission, piety, a kind of purity that doesn't question. But with Caleb, there was no filter. He looked at me like I was flesh, not a storefront display, and that broke me inside in a way I didn't even know I craved. Little by little, I started changing. Small things. I let my hair down more often, stopped parroting mechanical amens during services. My mom noticed first. She offered me tea one afternoon and tried to talk, asking if I was okay, if something was bothering me. I said I was tired. She smiled and said tiredness was normal, that faith always demands sacrifice. But what I felt wasn't soul-deep exhaustion. It was exhaustion from living a lie. That same week, Caleb saw me sitting by the fence, staring out at the field like I wanted it to carry me away. He walked by slowly, stopped a few yards off, and said without even looking at me, "How long are you going to keep pretending?" The words cut through me. I didn't know how to answer. I wasn't even sure if he was talking to me or himself. But something inside me tore open, and in that tear, between pain and relief, a part of me woke up. That Saturday, I walked to the house where he was staying, not with the courage of someone with a plan, but with the desperation of someone who couldn't stand not knowing what could have been. He was outside, cleaning his boots. He raised his eyes slowly, and for the first time, he said my name. Abigail. It sounded different coming from him, like it had weight, history, not just a role. I stepped closer, stood there, feeling my heart pound like it wanted to break free. And then, without preamble, without rehearsal, I asked, "If I left, would you come with me?" He looked at me for long seconds, and in that silence, everything was said. The risk, the weight, the deep cut it would leave in everything I knew, but also the chance to, for the first time, live true. He didn't answer. He just nodded, and that was enough. I went home that night knowing everything had changed, that there was a thin, final line between the Abigail I'd been and the one about to be born. And once I crossed it, there'd be no going back. Going home after that conversation was like walking toward a world that didn't recognize me anymore. Everything was in place. The Bible open on the sideboard, the smell of fresh-baked bread drifting from the kitchen, the muffled sound of hymns playing in the living room. But I wasn't the same, and the most painful part was realizing that in the home where I'd grown up, where I'd been taught to be the light of the world and the salt of the earth, I was now the doubt, the crack, the mistake that hadn't happened yet but was about to be found out. At dinner, my dad prayed over us like he always did, voice firm, words rehearsed, that authority filling the room like an invisible wall. I kept my head bowed like I'd been taught, but inside my body hummed. It wasn't rebellion, it was awareness, a kind of truce that once felt couldn't be undone. His prayer spoke of obedience, honor, surrender, and every word hit me like a reminder of how much I'd been shaped to fit a faith that never asked me to feel, only to follow. That night, lying in the bed I'd slept in my whole life, I stared at the ceiling for hours. My fingers gripped the sheets like they could anchor me to the ground. Caleb's image ebbed and flowed like a tide, and each time it returned, it brought more courage, more pain too, but it was a pain that made me feel alive, a pain that, unlike guilt, didn't apologize for existing. That's when I realized I'd already run away. Maybe not with my body, not yet. But my soul no longer lived in that house. My prayers had gone quiet, my words grew scarce, and my eyes, once always tracking my dad's gaze, now sought the horizon like someone gasping for air. 2 days later, everything blew up. Someone saw. They said I'd been spotted talking to Caleb, that smiles were exchanged, looks that didn't belong to a church girl. My dad called me into his study like he did when we were kids and broke some rule. But I wasn't a kid anymore, and he knew it the moment I walked in. His voice didn't waver. It was steady as ever. But there was something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear, not of me, but of what I was about to destroy. Our family name, the ministry's reputation, the image he'd built over decades of obedience and control. "Abigail Grace, is it true?" he asked, voice low, fists clenched. "Have you been meeting that man?" I looked him in the eye and for the first time didn't hesitate. Yes. The word came out calm. No defiance, no shame, just truth. He closed his eyes for a second, like the blow was physical. When he opened them, there was anger, there was disappointment, but what hurt most was seeing his wounded pride, like I was less a daughter and more a mark of his failure. "You're not leaving this house alone anymore," he said. "From now on, you'll be watched, We'll restore what the enemies tried to steal." I listened in silence, but inside, something snapped, because I knew he didn't want to hear me. He wanted to contain me, reshape me, like I could still fit into the role I'd already started tearing apart. That night, while the house slept, I got up quietly, grabbed a small bag, a change of clothes, a notebook, and left. The street was empty, the cold air biting my skin. Every step was a goodbye, not just to the house, but to the Abigail who lowered her eyes, who asked permission even to feel. At the end of the road, Caleb's pickup lights were on. He was there, waiting, hands on the wheel, eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. When I got close, he stepped out, saying nothing, just opened the passenger door, and in that gesture, silent and simple, I knew. From here on, there was no turning back, just the road, just choice, just the two of us against everything. The first night away from home was quieter than I'd expected. I thought I'd be shaking, crying, frantic, but what I felt was something else, a kind of calm emptiness, like my soul was floating, watching it all from outside. Caleb drove with his eyes locked on the road, jaw tight, like he was braced for me to ask to turn back any second. But I wasn't going back. I didn't even know how to be in that place anymore without breaking a little more each day. We were just a few miles from town, but it felt like we'd already crossed into different worlds. And in me, there was no regret. There was a strange kind of peace. The road, the distant lights, the silence between us. It all felt like a dream, not made of fantasy, but a fracture. Caleb offered me the passenger seat and the quiet, and I took both with gratitude. I didn't need explanations or promises. I just needed to keep going. For the first time in my life, I didn't want certainty. I just wanted the unknown, even if it swallowed me, even if it hurt. When we stopped, he got out first, walked to the truck bed and started sorting the few things he had. I stayed seated, staring into the darkness around us, trying to figure out what I'd just done. It wasn't just an escape, it was a surrender. I'd left behind not only my home, but everything that had defined me up to now, my borrowed faith, my revered last name, the face my mom had gently molded to fit the church's expectations. None of it came with me. Just the clothes on my back, a bag with loose notes, and a courage I still wasn't sure was real or just desperation in disguise. Caleb came back to the door, leaned against the hood, and said softly, "You sure about this?" I looked at him with a calm that surprised me. It wasn't a happy calm, it was an exhausted one. The kind that comes from spending too long trying to hold everything together, and now being ready to let it all fall, as long as I was finally free. I'm not sure of anything, but I know I don't want to live trapped anymore. He nodded, and I saw a quiet respect in his eyes. He wasn't the kind of man who cheered bold moves. He knew the weight of choices too well. But unlike the others, he didn't try to talk me into what was right. He just stayed present, and in that moment, that was more than I could ask for. In the early hours, I woke up startled, like my body was still tied to old habits. For a second, I didn't recognize the place, or myself. Then I remembered I'd left, and that memory hurt and eased me at the same time. I got up slowly, slipped on my shoes, and stepped out to breathe. Caleb was awake, sitting there, a bottle in hand, his gaze lost somewhere that wasn't here anymore. "I don't know if I can give you what you're hoping for," he said, not looking at me. "And who said I came looking for something?" I replied. "Maybe I just didn't want to live somewhere no one asks what I feel anymore." He looked at me for a few seconds, and then, for the first time since I'd run, he smiled. A small, tired, but real smile. And in that instant, I knew that even if it all went wrong, even if the world swallowed us after, I wouldn't go back, because I'd chosen. For the first time, I'd chosen. and no one would ever take that from me again. Mornings started tasting different. I woke up without an alarm, without a morning hymn, without my mom tapping the door with her gentle voice telling me to hurry. I woke to the sounds of the real world. Birds, wind, the dry clatter of Caleb tinkering with something outside. And still, something in me stayed trapped. It wasn't regret. It was a new feeling, harder to name. Like I'd escaped captivity, but the captivity still lived inside me. Caleb didn't say much, but he watched a lot. He noticed when I stared too long at nothing, when my breath hitched reading my mom's unanswered texts, when I turned my face to hide the tears that came without warning. And he didn't make a fuss. He just gave me space. And that made me love him more than if he'd tried to comfort me with pretty words. But the silence between us started weighing heavier too. It came loaded with unspoken questions, old fears, memories he never shared. And I wanted to ask. I wanted to know where he'd learned to live like this, so guarded, so weathered. I wanted to understand why, sometimes, he looked at me like he was about to apologize for something that hadn't even happened yet. One night, after a particularly rough day, I couldn't take it. We were sitting by a makeshift fire, eating something. Too hot for the weather, and I just burst. "Have you ever loved someone before me?" He didn't answer right away, and that hurt. Because this time, his silence didn't feel like space. It felt like distance. "Yeah," he said, not looking at me. But I wasn't good at it. I went quiet for a few seconds. But that wasn't what I wanted to hear. It wasn't about his past. It was about our now. "And do you think you'll be good with me?" He looked up. There was an honesty there that undid me. "I don't know, but I'm trying. And that's more than I did for anyone else." My eyes stung, not from sadness, from exhaustion. Loving a man like Caleb was like walking barefoot over broken glass. You know it'll hurt, but you keep going because every step is real, because every pain comes from truth, not omission. Over time, the little things started piling up, money running tight, the constant fear of being recognized in some too small town, the odd looks at gas stations when they asked where we were from, and I hesitated, not knowing the right answer anymore. And worst of all, the longing. Not for home, but for a part of me, still trying to be born. I started realizing that running away wasn't enough. It didn't free me from the fears I'd grown up carrying, from the voices in my head saying I was wrong, from memories of my dad's voice shouting verses that sounded more like punishment than comfort. I might have been far from the church, but it still echoed in me. And sometimes, when Caleb went quiet too long, I wondered if he was getting tired of me. And then I hated myself for it, for still needing someone's affection to prove I was real. "You don't have to shape yourself to me," he said once, noticing I was holding back to avoid a fight. "I don't want you turning into someone else because of me. I like who you are, even when you're still figuring it out." Those words hit me like a breeze after a storm. But they scared me too, because I didn't know if I liked who I was. Lately, Caleb started leaving earlier, chasing odd jobs around the towns we passed through. I stayed behind, writing in my notebook, reading books he lent me, walking, trying to sort my feelings. And every time he came back, it was like I'd been holding my breath for hours and could only breathe again when I heard his footsteps. It was in that gap between what we were and what we didn't know how to be that the first cracks showed up, and I started seeing that loving was just the first part. The hardest part would be sticking with it. The tension didn't blow up all at once. It crept in slowly like water seeping through cracks, silent until one day everything gives. It started with little irritations, silences that weren't so comfortable anymore, glances that lingered less. Caleb was still himself, steady, quiet there, but something in him had shifted, like the weight of having me beside him, of being responsible not just for himself, but now for me too, was starting to cost more than he knew he could pay, and I felt it. Felt it in the clipped gestures, the vague replies, the way he dodged saying my name. Up until then, his silence had held me. Now it started pushing me away. I began wondering if he regretted it, if, when he looked at me, he saw more burden than choice, and I hated myself for it, for turning love into doubt, for hurting over so little. One night after another aimless day, he tossed the truck keys on the table and said without looking at me, "This isn't a fairy tale, Abby. You know that, right?" I froze. It hit like a knife. Not the words, but the tone. Like I was daydreaming, like everything I'd left behind was some lovesick girl's naivety, not a gut-wrenching choice made with my whole self. "And when did I ever ask you to be my happy ending?" I shot back, firm but voice-breaking. I didn't run from my life to fall into some new script. I ran to live, even if it hurts, even if it's messy. He looked at me, worn out, and in that look there was more exhaustion with himself than with me. "I just don't know if I can give you what you need." "And you think I know what I need?" I countered. "I'm trying, Caleb, but you've got to try too. I can't do this alone." We sat in silence for long minutes, and there, for the first time, I felt fear, not of what might come, but of what might end right then, that night. The next few days, he got quieter. Left early, came back late, barely spoke, and me, too proud to beg for talk, pretended everything was fine. Until one morning, waking up, I realized he hadn't come back. I waited hours. The sun rose, fell, and he didn't show. My heart beat so loud I could hear it. Every minute without a word felt like the world reminding me what everyone had said. He's not reliable. He's not for you. He'll leave you. And me, who thought I'd shed every fear, saw there was one bigger still, being abandoned after betting it all. Not just my home, not just my reputation, but the only version of me that was finally true. He came back that night. No injuries, no excuses. Just walked in and said, "I needed to think." "And did you think about me?" I asked, throat tight. He paused, then nodded, his look blending pain and love, regret and doubt. "I thought about everything, about who you are, what you lost, what I've got to offer, and I wondered if being with me is saving you or breaking you." My answer came faster than I expected, maybe both, but I chose you anyway. He hugged me, hard for the first time, with need, with surrender, and in that embrace we cried, not from the pain, but from the courage, because real love is this, pushing on even when everything in you screams to run. But in that moment, eyes burning and chest tight, I knew it was with him I wanted to face whatever came. Not because he was perfect, but because he stayed, and sometimes that's rarer than love. I didn't know staying could hurt as much as leaving. After that night, Caleb stayed, but not like before. Now he looked at me with a deeper, quieter care, like he'd realized that no matter how strong I seemed, there was still a part of me soft and learning to stand. And maybe I did the same. I stopped expecting absolute security from him, ready, answers, packaged certainties. I started seeing him for what he was, a man carrying more silence than past, and more love than he knew how to show. We learned to share the hours without demands, to respect the distances, even in the same truck, even side by side. Some days we barely swapped 3 sentences, and still I felt he was with me. Other times, a gesture, a glance, a quick touch on the shoulder, a plate set closer, was enough for my whole body to know I wasn't alone. But it wasn't all peace. There were ghosts, and not just his. Mine sat at the table too, sometimes with my mom's face, sometimes my dad's voice echoing in my head, sometimes just the memory of sitting in church, dressed to please, heart mute. Now I was free, and that was a gift that weighed heavy. Because with freedom came the responsibility to stop blaming anyone else for my pain. It was all mine now. Every choice, every mistake, every step. I started writing about it, about the love that saved and challenged me at once, about the faith I was still seeking, but now with my own questions, no fear of hell, no duty to seem holy. I found God was still in me even after I left the pews, that maybe he'd never lived in that sanctuary, but in the small space between what I felt and what I'd been allowed to say. One day Caleb read a page of my notebook without asking. I found him sitting with it in his hands, face serious, breath held. I thought he'd get mad, but he just said, "You write like you're setting yourself free." And that scares me, because part of me's afraid you'll figure out you don't need me to stand anymore. That hit me with a tenderness I didn't expect. I came over slow, sat beside him and said, "I didn't run to make you my foundation. I ran to find out I could walk alone. But if I'm walking beside someone, I want it to be you." He looked at me with an old weariness in his eyes, but something new was there too. A kind of peace. Like he finally got that he wasn't a burden or a crutch. He was presence. And for both of us, that was more than enough. The days rolled on. The road stretched out. Life, imperfect as it is, kept unfolding. We had good moments. We had fights. We had nights when the silence hurt again, and others when it still saved us. But there was a difference now. We chose to keep going, even tired, even broken. I never went back to my parents' house, but one day I got a letter from my mom. It was signed in her usual steady handwriting, but there was a tremble between the lines. She didn't say she forgave me. She didn't ask me to come back. She just wrote, "I hope wherever you are, you're at peace with who you chose to be." I kept that letter folded in my notebook, not as a reminder of what I'd lost, but as a sign that even in pain, understanding can grow. That not all love shows up in hugs. Sometimes it comes quiet, the way Caleb did. Today, when I look at him, I still see a man fighting every day to hold steady. And I fight too, but we fight together. Not for a happy ending, but for a true middle. Because love didn't take us out of the world. It just showed us that, even broken, we can still build something good. And that's more than I ever dreamed of back when I was on my knees, repeating prayers that were never mine. Now every word I speak carries my story. And every step I take beside him is a choice, not an escape. We're two survivors, and we've chosen to stay.